I really want to get right into it. Senate Bill 1027 is heading to a vote next week. It's already passed several committees. You've been outspoken against this bill. We've had a lot of really transformative proposals passed in Oklahoma through citizen petition. Why have you been outspoken against this bill?
Well, I just want to clarify that the new bill doesn't say that every county has to be accounted for when gathering signatures. It's just putting caps on the total signatures allowed for each county. So if someone wanted to go about getting so many signatures in Oklahoma County, um, which under this new law, over 92% of eligible voters could not add their signature to the total threshold if this bill becomes law. It's not saying that every county has to have X amount of signatures. It's just putting caps on the total signatures allowed for each county. Now, how volunteers go out and complete the necessary required signatures within a limited 90-day window is a near mathematical impossibility, which is the purpose of this bill. For the past 4 years, I've been very outspoken on protecting and even strengthening the ballot initiative process. Unfortunately, we've seen year after year it being hacked away. And this year, we've seen the mother of all bills to dismantle the citizen led ballot initiative, which allows ordinary people to influence public policy at the grassroots level. And you mentioned the signature caps, which excludes many eligible voters from adding their signature to the amount required to simply gain access to the ballot so everyone can vote on a during a major election. I think that's the biggest misconception that I've been reading online is that people are assuming that the signatures alone are what is passing the question. And so people are like, well, they shouldn't just be able to go out and collect signatures in the urban areas and dictate law for everyone. But that's not the case. The only reason why volunteers are out in densely populated areas like Oklahoma County and Tulsa County is because it's the only way they can get the signatures needed to reach that 95,000 valid voter signatures for a statutory change, to reach that 170 something thousand signatures for a constitutional change. Once they get that threshold, then it simply goes onto a ballot for the entire state to decide upon. This is just for ballot access. And in addition, this bill does some other egregious things that I feel like have kind of gone under the radar. It puts unparalleled power and broad power in the hands of the Secretary of State, an unelected person. Unlike the Attorney General, who's elected by the people, the Secretary of State under this bill could completely tank a ballot initiative just based off of whatever arbitrary standards they want, a directive from the governor, for example. It also violates some constitutional precedents. I'm not a fan of Citizen United, but under that 2011 Supreme Court ruling, it says that you cannot ban out of state contributions from going in state to a particular, whether it's a campaign or a ballot initiative. You can't ban out of state donations. And then also there's another constitutional precedence, I believe it was term limits versus Savage, that said that anyone can come in and collect signatures. Of course, the signatures have to be from valid voters, but the people collecting the signatures do not have to be registered voters of the state of Oklahoma. But there's a key component in this, and that in the bill, there's a severability clause acknowledging that this bill will go to the courts. But if any parts of it, like the precedents that I mentioned, are thrown out, then the other parts will sustain, it will uphold. And so the real culprit in this bill, as you mentioned, is the signature cap. And I mentioned in committee that if the purpose of the bill is to get more signatures from rural Oklahoma, then I had written an amendment that I proposed that should be adopted that would extend that signature gathering process from 90 days to 180 days. But it has to this day not been adopted. So I think that makes it pretty evident what this is about. It's not about getting more signatures from rural Oklahoma. This is about silencing the voice of Oklahomans.
And as I'm sure you also know, Oklahoma has currently one of the shortest windows to be able to gather signatures of any state. I think the next shortest window is like 10 months. And House Speaker Kyle Hilbert, his reasoning for supporting this bill has been, to give rural voters more of a say, as opposed to Oklahoma City and Tulsa. But as you just pointed out, it would limit the voice of rural voters as well. And I want to just give an example. Oklahoma Policy recently put out a report that showed overall, if this bill was passed, 2.2 million voters would be ineligible to participate in the citizen petition gathering process. And for Oklahoma County, that would mean that out of the 222,554 eligible signers, only 25,594 would be eligible. In a rural county like Adair County, out of the 5,222 that will be eligible, only 601 would be if this bill is made into law. So
Uh,
how is it not hypocritical?
well, the speaker said this is about election integrity, and this is actually the opposite of election integrity. This is voter disenfranchisement.
Hmm.
And it's a real problem. But another issue with it is it has an emergency amendment attached to it. And the reason why this is significant and the reason why we can't let this pass is because if Senate Bill 1027 is passed into law with the emergency amendment, that means the people of Oklahoma cannot do a veto referendum. In the past, my seatmate, who's now the county commissioner for Oklahoma County, Jason Lowe, he did a veto referendum on permitless carry, and he came very close to collecting the amount of signatures needed that would have sent that bill to a question for the people of Oklahoma to decide. Now, Commissioner Lowe came up just a little bit short, but he was able to exercise that constitutional right of a veto of an election, not an election, but a veto referendum. And if it has an amendment on it, that means it goes into effect into law immediately, which would prohibit the citizens of Oklahoma from exercising that veto referendum right. And so this bill is just chock full of problematic um, provisions that further take away the rights of the people. And we're not just seeing this in elections, but we're seeing this with due process, with
Hmm.
issues around free speech, with Christian nationalism. Just yesterday, the Oklahoma House passed a resolution declaring Christ as king.
Hmm.
So we are in our Oklahoma, specifically in our own constitutional crisis when it comes to taking away rights from the people. And I'm very concerned because I understand, I see a lot of people who are also concerned, but unfortunately, I think that they take our rights for granted, just assuming that this is all going to be okay. And to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, he said, "What you have is a republic if you can keep it." And that requires engaged citizens and people who are going to raise their voice and let the legislators know that what you're doing isn't going to go unnoticed. We have to show up to vote. We have to show up at peaceful protests. Continue calling lawmakers, continue emailing. And even if you don't get any acknowledgement back, just know that that is going on their radar. In that last committee meeting on Senate Bill 1027, it was acknowledged several times that over 300 people have called and emailed in opposition to that bill. Yes, it still passed, but there were two Republicans who voted no, and it was on, they're aware that people aren't just going to roll over and allow this to go through without making their voices heard. What's the alternative? If no one does anything at all, then they're going to continue assuming that what they're doing is completely fine, and then you're going to see even more egregious bills come as a result of that.
And just as a reminder for those who may not be aware, when you think about all that we've been able to achieve through the citizen petition process, just in recent years, criminal justice reform, the passage of medical marijuana industry, Medicaid expansion, and so it's definitely something that affects all Oklahomans. What's specifically next? When is the next vote on this bill? And what can people do to reach out?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dion. So this bill originated in the Senate. It came over to the House. Speaker Hilbert added an amendment to change the percentages. At first, it was I think it was a 4% cap across the board. No, it was a 10% cap in Tulsa and Oklahoma County, and then a 4% cap on valid voter signatures in other counties. that change to the percentages that you mentioned. And this is why it gets so in the weeds that a lot of people check out. But for a statutory change, it allows for 10.5% of the total votes cast in the last general election. And that's what it caps the signatures at. For a constitutional change, it caps it at 20.8% based off the last general election. Now, the reason why that percentage is higher is because, according to the Oklahoma Constitution, in order to make a constitutional change, you have to have 15% of the total votes cast in the last gubernatorial election. And so for a statutory, it's not 15%, but 8%. So the difference there is you're looking at, for a statutory change, about 95,000 valid voter signatures currently based off the last governor's election. And for a constitutional change, you're looking at about 170,000 valid voter signatures. So the difference between 90 and about 170 is why you have one cap at 10.5% and the other cap at 20.8%. All that to say, those are very oddly specific and arbitrary numbers. When asked why they were chosen, there's no good answer on why those specific percentages were chosen, but I can tell you why, because the architects behind this bill know that with those percentages, it's a near mathematical impossibility to reach the required signature threshold in that limited 90-day time. And it's also further evidenced by them refusing to accept my amendment to simply expand the signature gathering window from 90 to 180 days, which you mentioned earlier still is on the very low end of the other 25 states that have ballot initiatives. Because, for example, in Ohio, they also have the citizen-led initiative, and it's evergreen. They can collect signatures for 2 years, for 3 years. They can take as long as they want. Once they reach enough valid voter signatures, then the question goes to the ballot. In Oklahoma, it's just 90 days. It's very unusual.
I mean, you described a constitutional crisis that it appears they're ready to set up. I mean, they've put into the bill that if one part of this is found invalid constitutionally, then the rest of it stands. And really, in a lot of ways, Oklahoma has been uh, ground zero for what we're seeing nationally. A lot of the things that are being implemented nationally, we've already seen when it comes to attacks on DEI, when it comes to limits on free speech and protest and things like that. Um, do you feel that if people rise up here when it comes to defending democracy, that it can have an effect across the nation?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely people are looking at Oklahoma. They're looking at Texas. Just yesterday, Governor Abbott in Texas passed $1 billion private school voucher bill, and that had failed the previous 6 times. But there's no campaign contribution limit in Texas. There's also no term limits for the governor of Texas. They're in the long game for this. So in the past, the private school voucher bill had failed 6 times. Those moderate Republicans were outspent by two Texas billionaires who are majorly influential in Oklahoma as well when it comes to Christian nationalist legislation, theocratic legislation. And they removed those dissenting Republicans and replaced them with those who would toe the line for Governor Abbott and grift off of public education. So they're taking money from taxpayers and they're funneling it into the pockets of those who already send their kids to private school and also the people who run those schools. And at the same time, they're continuing to um, not fund public education adequately. And so when people around the country are kind of looking for what's coming next, they do look for Oklahoma and Texas, specifically Oklahoma. It seems that legislation here just passes easier, unfortunately, the bad stuff in particular. And so while they're watching this legislation happen, if they also see how the people are organizing and making their voices heard through peaceful protesting, through showing up to committees. I mean, one of the unique things about Oklahoma committee meetings is we don't even allow public testimony. That's unusual. Most states allow for the public to come in and weigh in on a particular issue. Oklahomans, you don't have that right. So, first off, we could, but that's Speaker of the House's decision. It's not a statutory thing. an administrative rule issue. And so people, if they start to realize that they're not only disenfranchised, but they're excluded from these conversations that are happening in rooms that you belong in, then it could make a difference. And I mean, it's just really tough to break through, Dion, because we were, anytime I post a debate or something, typically my debates are about 4 minutes, and I'll post it, and then it may get an average of about 30 seconds who view it, people who view it, and then according to the analytics, so I try to cut some of the stuff out and just like post maybe like clips here or there. It's still like 25 to 30 seconds, so it's really hard to break through the public and educate them on what's going on. But the only other difference is the only other alternative is to stop, and you can't do that because that would be even worse. I do acknowledge that frustration can often lead to silence for a lot of people, and nothing wrong with resting and taking time to recharge your batteries. But we need everyone in the game. We need everyone to resist and to make their voices heard.